I want to get this boat unsank and towed back. Yes. A teenager, not Nolan Wells, answering a dispatcher's question about a sinking boat. 14 words, recorded in real time by a 911 operator, then uploaded, downloaded, clipped, and reclipped until almost nobody listening to it now remembers what question it was actually answering. A faulty bilge pump. A boat taking on water off a barrier island 10 miles from the Mississippi coast. A group of friends deciding, in real time, what to do about it, and a single garbled sound at the front of the recording that some listeners insist they can hear as a name. That name became a theory. The theory became an accusation. The accusation became a campaign with hundreds of thousands of followers behind it. And the campaign became a death threat that the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Mississippi state authorities are now investigating. None of that happened on Horn Island on the 4th of July. All of it happened afterward, on phones, in comment sections, to people who were never on that boat and never in the water when Nolan Wells did not come back. A missing 18-year-old. A body recovered 2 days later. A sealed autopsy, a family with more questions than answers a month later, and a growing list of private citizens who had nothing to do with any of it, now living with security concerns because a stranger online decided they already knew the ending. This is where we start, not with who did what to Nolan Wells, with what the evidence can actually tell us, what it cannot, and what happens to real people in the space between those two things. The Nolan Wells case is not short on theories. It was never short on theories. Within days of his body being found, there were theories about a fight on the boat, theories about a cover-up among friends, theories about who left him behind and why, theories tied to race, and theories built entirely around a garbled syllable in a 911 recording. What the case is short on is verified answers. The official state autopsy and the toxicology report that reportedly accompanies it remain sealed pending presentation to a Jackson County grand jury. The independent autopsy the family commissioned came back with an undetermined cause and manner of death. More than a month after his body was recovered from the water off Horn Island, the central question in this case, how did Nolan Wells actually die, has not been publicly answered by anyone with the authority to answer it. And every time a theory gets repeated online as if it were an established fact, the distance between those two things gets a little harder for a casual viewer to see. That distance is not a technicality. It has real consequences for real people. A private citizen has received what his own attorney calls a credible death threat, tied directly to an unfounded theory about his involvement. A grieving mother had a professional misconduct complaint filed against her nursing license the same season she was publicly demanding a fuller investigation into her own son's death. 3 separate individuals in 3 separate states with no personal connection to anyone in this case now face federal charges for threatening a sitting judge, a witness, and county officials. Who has actually been charged with anything related to Nolan Wells' death itself? As of this recording, nobody. Who has been charged with crimes that only exist because of this case's online afterlife? 3 people. And possibly more. That imbalance is the actual story right now, whether or not it is the story anyone wanted. Before the GPS logs, the 911 audio, the cease and desist letters, and the arguments about who said what to whom, there was Nolan Xavier Wells. He was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and had recently finished high school with a path toward college football ahead of him. Friends who grew up alongside him describe a group that had known each other since childhood, racially and ethnically mixed, close in a way that doesn't always survive graduation. One of those friends, in a nationally broadcast interview, described the group in exactly those terms: tight-knit. On the evening of July 3rd, Nolan cooked dinner for his parents. He kissed his mother, Christine Wells Wansley, told her he loved her, and left for a friend's house before the group set out the next morning to celebrate the 4th of July on Horn Island, a remote, largely uninhabited barrier island reachable only by private boat, with no staff, no drinking water, no shelter, and no cell service once you're actually on it. Roughly 300 people, many of them former classmates from the same stretch of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, were gathered there that day. His parents have also shared a smaller, older memory. Nolan as a toddler, running into a room in the middle of an argument between them and dancing until neither of them could stay angry. It is not a case detail. It is not meant to be one. It is a reminder that the young man now reduced, online, to a set of timestamps and disputed audio clips had an entire childhood, a family, and a personality that had nothing to do with any of this. The boat carrying Nolan and his friends left the mainland dock at 9:56 a.m. on July 4th and reached Horn Island at 11:14 a.m., according to GPS data released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. At some point that afternoon, as the group prepared to head back, Nolan chose to stay behind rather than return with them. Accounts differ on exactly why, and this is one of the open questions in the case, not a settled fact. His body was recovered from the water off the island's shoreline on the morning of July 6th, following a search involving the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the U.S. Coast Guard, the National Park Service, and the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind said dental records confirmed the identification and that there were no obvious signs of physical injury on the body. That single observation rules almost nothing in, and it rules almost nothing out. In the weeks since, Nolan's death has become a fixture at press conferences far from Horn Island, including one held during the Knox National Convention in Chicago, where his photograph was placed in front of the podium before his family and their attorney spoke. His mother has said, plainly and repeatedly, that her son was always willing to lift other people up. That sentence, not the one still being fought over in the comments, is the one that belongs at the center of this story. I want to be precise about what this piece is and what it is not. This is not an accusation against any named friend, witness, or bystander in this case. As of this recording, no publicly available evidence establishes that any specific individual caused Nolan Wells' death or participated in concealing what happened to him. Law enforcement has not named a suspect. Prosecutors have not filed a charge related to his death. Everyone currently being discussed online by name, in that specific context, is there because of speculation, not because of anything an investigator has said on the record. But this is also not an argument that Nolan's family should accept an early theory, accidental drowning or anything else, and simply stop asking questions. Christine Wansley has said her son's case is still ongoing, even after successfully clearing one unrelated controversy attached to her name. She is right to keep asking. A family does not forfeit its right to scrutinize an investigation just because that scrutiny is inconvenient for the pace at which institutions prefer to move. Both of those things can be true at once. A family can be owed a rigorous, transparent, adequately resourced investigation into their son's death. And a private citizen who happened to help a sinking boat that afternoon can be owed the basic presumption that helping is not the same thing as causing harm. Holding both of those truths at the same time is harder than picking one side and defending it loudly. It is also the only honest place to stand in a case like this one. Let's take the pieces of this case one at a time. What each one actually establishes, what it does not. The 911 call. The recording confirms that a boat took on water near Horn Island on July 4th, and that its passengers requested a tow from a marine assistance service. It confirms that a teenager aboard that boat spoke with a dispatcher about getting the vessel unsank and towed back to shore. It does not establish Nolan Wells' location at the time of the call, and no reporting has confirmed he was aboard that specific boat when the call was placed. Some listeners online claim to hear a name, a syllable that sounded to them like Bart, in garbled audio near the start of the recording, and treated that as confirmation of a suspect's identity. A recording of static is not a confession. Hearing a name is not the same thing as proving what that person was doing at the moment you believe you heard it. The viral confrontation video. In the days after Nolan went missing, a video clip circulated widely online, and many viewers assumed it showed some kind of altercation involving him. A friend named in the video, Trayston Shepard, addressed the clip directly in a national television interview and said the raised voice heard in it was her own, and that it did not depict any confrontation involving Nolan. That correction, made on the record and on camera, did not travel anywhere near as far as the original speculation did. Corrections rarely do. The sea tow assistance. Multiple outlets have reported that when the friends' boat began taking on water, another young man, a former high school football teammate of Nolan's, home from college and also on Horn Island that day, brought his own boat over to assist, and that the group ultimately canceled its tow request once he arrived. Helping a stranded boat is not, on its own, evidence of anything except helping a stranded boat. No law enforcement agency has publicly identified this young man as a suspect or a person of interest at any point in this investigation. His family says he sat for interviews and voluntarily provided his phone, his GPS device, and his boat to investigators, without a warrant and without requiring one. The anonymous nursing board complaint. Roughly a month after Nolan's death, Christine Wansley learned that the Mississippi Board of Nursing had opened a professional misconduct investigation into her, based on a complaint filed by someone who declined to attach a name to it. Family attorney Ben Crump called it a warning shot meant to pressure a grieving mother into silence, and noted she had never had a single complaint filed against her in her career. The board closed the case within days, and Wansley confirmed the closure herself on Facebook, writing that the episode had added more hurt to an already devastating stretch of her life. Whether or not the timing of the complaint was coincidental, its practical effect was the same regardless. A family already living through an unresolved death also had to spend a week defending a professional license that had nothing to do with any of it. The preservation notices and subpoenas. Nolan's family, through their legal team, has sought records from social media platforms and location tracking applications, and reportedly sent evidence preservation notices to several families connected to the friend group, including, according to multiple outlets, a local judge whose son was on the island that day. Receiving a preservation notice is not, by itself, evidence of wrongdoing by anyone who receives one. It is a family and their attorneys building a record early, in case a criminal investigation stalls and a civil claim becomes the more realistic path to answers. The cease and desist letters. After a social media influencer with more than 200,000 followers repeatedly described a specific former teammate of Nolan's as a suspect in his death, and shared that young man's home address, property records, and information about his family, the teammate's attorney sent a formal cease and desist letter demanding the claims stop and the personal information come down. The attorney has stated plainly, and no reporting has contradicted him, that no publicly available facts support calling his client a suspect in anything. The letter also functions as a preservation notice of its own, demanding the influencer's posts be retained rather than deleted should a defamation suit follow. The reward and the fundraisers. Separately, the father of another friend in the group has publicly offered a $50,000 reward for information, and some of the friends who were on the island that day have raised money online to cover legal costs as they face both public scrutiny and, in at least one case, credible threats. Neither a reward nor a legal defense fund is evidence of guilt or innocence. Both are simply what happens when private citizens get pulled into the gravity of a national story they did not choose to be part of. Each of these artifacts proves something narrow and specific. None of them proves who is responsible for what happened to Nolan Wells. None of them was ever capable of proving that on its own, no matter how many times it gets reposted with a caption that says otherwise. It isn't only individuals who deserve this kind of scrutiny. The systems investigating this case deserve some of it too. Search efforts in the first 48 hours were hampered by the island's own geography. No cell coverage, no fresh water, and, according to police records, at least one round of drone flights cut short after the batteries reportedly failed in the July heat. The state's official autopsy and toxicology results, completed weeks ago by most accounts, remain sealed until a grand jury convenes, with no announced timeline for when that will happen. Investigators have said they've interviewed roughly 60 witnesses so far, which is either a sign of real thoroughness or a sign of just how large and scattered the crowd on that island was that afternoon, depending on how charitably you want to read it. Is the pace of this investigation ordinary for a case with this many witnesses, this much water between the scene and the mainland, and this much public attention layered on top? Is the sealing of the autopsy standard procedure ahead of a grand jury, or is it, as some observers have suggested, unusually opaque for a case this closely watched? Has outreach to witnesses on that island been as even-handed as officials say it has been? These are fair questions to keep asking. They are not, on their own, proof that anyone in an official capacity has done anything wrong. Slow is not automatically the same thing as hidden, and a sealed file is not automatically the same thing as a cover-up. But a family that has already had to fight off one unfounded professional complaint has earned the right to ask these questions loudly, and to keep asking them until the answers actually arrive. Race has become part of the public conversation around this case, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. Nolan Wells was black. Most of the friend group he traveled to Horn Island with, and most of the crowd gathered there that day, was not. Commentators, including the historian Ibram X. Kendi and sports commentator Stephen A. Smith have publicly argued that the case deserves scrutiny, partly because of that dynamic, and Nolan's family and their attorneys have said they are watching for signs of racial bias in how the investigation has been conducted. Mississippi's history with racial violence, and with cases involving black victims moving more slowly through the legal system than cases involving white victims, is a documented, well-established part of the record. Naming that history honestly is not an accusation against any specific person or agency in this specific case. It is context for why a community's distrust exists in the first place, and that distrust is not irrational just because it is, in this particular investigation, still unproven. The same discipline has to apply in both directions. History explains why suspicion exists here. It does not, on its own, supply evidence about what actually happened to Nolan Wells on July 4th. A sealed autopsy is not proof of a cover-up just because Mississippi has a documented history of cover-ups. And a coroner's early statement about a lack of visible injury is not proof of an innocent accident just because most drownings are exactly that. Context earns your attention. It does not get to skip the evidentiary line and stand in for proof either way. Here is the part of this story that should worry anyone who makes videos like this one for a living, myself included. A raised voice in a video, misheard by thousands of strangers as a confrontation, traveled across platforms for days before the person who actually raised her voice corrected the record on national television. A garbled syllable in a 911 recording, misheard as a name, became the foundation for calling a private citizen a murder suspect to an audience of hundreds of thousands. Fabricated toxicology results, according to multiple reports, have circulated on social media. Results no medical examiner's office has released, and no grand jury has yet even reviewed. If a recording can be misheard, and a clip can be misread, and a document can be convincingly faked at a scale large enough to fool people in a case being watched by millions, then confidence is not a substitute for provenance. It never was. It is just louder, and it travels faster. That correction does not undo the harm already done. A private citizen received what his attorney describes as a credible death threat. His family says their home address, property records, and information about relatives' workplaces were published online alongside the accusations. Federal, state, and local authorities are now investigating not what happened to Nolan Wells, but what has been done to people wrongly accused of causing it. Three individuals with no known personal connection to anyone in this case have been federally charged with threatening a judge, a witness, and county officials. Being angry on a stranger's behalf does not authorize threatening another stranger's life. It never has, and this case is not going to be the exception. There's a legal thread running underneath all of this that's worth pulling on directly, because a lot of the online argument comes down to a confusion about where the line actually sits. Saying, publicly, "I believe this specific named person killed Nolan Wells," is a factual assertion. If it turns out to be false, it can be defamation. It can be defamation, full stop, regardless of how sincerely the person posting it believed it. Saying, "I think this investigation should be moving faster," or "I don't think officials have looked hard enough at this angle," is opinion. Opinions, generally, are not defamatory because they aren't presented as verified fact in the first place. A huge amount of the online conflict in this case sits exactly on that line, which is precisely why some of it is now heading toward actual courtrooms instead of staying in comment sections. There's also a difference between what a family's civil legal maneuvering can prove and what it's actually for. Subpoenas for phone records, preservation notices to friends and their families, an evidence preservation request sent even to a local judge, none of that, by itself, establishes that any recipient did something wrong. It's consistent with a family and their attorneys preparing two tracks at once, pushing the criminal investigation forward and quietly building the record for a wrongful death claim if the criminal process doesn't ultimately deliver answers. A wrongful death case doesn't require proving someone intended harm. It can rest on something as ordinary as an argument that a group of friends should not have left an 18-year-old alone on a remote island without cell service, regardless of what he ultimately chose. That is a real legal theory. It is not the same thing as an accusation of murder, even though both can sound, from a distance, like the same kind of trouble. And there's a practical reason some of this is likely to move slowly on purpose. If Nolan's case ever does produce criminal charges against someone, any parallel civil lawsuit involving that same person becomes a minefield for both sides. A defendant's civil deposition can become fodder for cross-examination in a criminal trial, and vice versa. Attorneys on both sides of a case like this one typically wait out the criminal process before pushing a civil one forward, not because they're hiding anything, but because doing it in the wrong order can compromise the very case they're trying to win. If there is one rule this case should teach anyone still trying to sort fact from noise, it is this: a time-stamped GPS log outranks a guess about someone's tone of voice in a blurry video. A sworn statement to investigators outranks a screenshot shared without context. A forensic phone extraction, voluntarily handed over, outranks an anonymous complaint filed by someone unwilling to attach their own name to it. And a completed autopsy, reviewed in full by a grand jury, outranks every theory ever built from a clip somebody has watched 40 times looking for a reason to believe it. None of that is a rule this case invented. It is just a rule this case keeps illustrating, over and over, at the direct expense of people who never asked to become the illustration. So where does that leave the actual investigation? Not closed, not resolved, open, along a few specific and identifiable lanes. There is a witness lane. Roughly 60 people have reportedly been interviewed as investigators try to reconstruct Nolan's final hours on Horn Island, including conflicting accounts of exactly who he was with and why he chose to remain on the island rather than return with the group. There is a forensic lane. The state's autopsy and toxicology results reportedly exist but remain sealed, pending presentation to a Jackson County grand jury that will ultimately decide whether any criminal charges are warranted. Nobody outside that sealed process currently has access to what those results say, regardless of what any screenshot online claims. There is a digital lane. Subpoenaed phone records, app data, and location history may eventually place people, and Nolan, more precisely on the island's timeline than memory and secondhand accounts can manage on their own. And there is a civil lane running in parallel to the criminal one, built on preservation notices and subpoenas rather than public accusations. A family keeping every door open rather than accusing a specific name of anything. Each of these lanes can move independently of the others. None of them, on its own, currently tells us how Nolan Wells died. Together, eventually, they might. This is where I land. Christine Wansley should not have to choose between demanding the truth about her son and being harassed for demanding it. The public should not have to choose between caring deeply about what happened to Nolan Wells and refusing to convict private, uncharged people of murder based on a misheard word in a 911 recording. A former teammate who spent part of an afternoon towing a sinking boat should not have to hire a private investigator to find out who is threatening his life over a theory that never had an evidentiary basis to begin with. Those things are not actually in tension with each other. They are the same value. Insist on evidence before you insist on an answer, applied consistently in every direction, whether or not that's convenient for whichever version of this story you'd prefer to believe. We can hold both duties at once, demand that investigators move with real urgency and real transparency, and refuse to let anyone get convicted in a comment section before a grand jury has even reviewed the file. That is harder than picking a side and defending it. It is also the only version of this story that can plausibly end with an actual answer, instead of one grieving family and several ruined reputations left behind by people who were never on that island in the first place. Strip away the subpoenas, the cease and desist letters, the nursing board, the federal threat cases, and what's still true is the simplest and worst fact in the entire story. An 18-year-old kissed his mother goodbye on July 3rd, told her he loved her, and never came home. If you have original, unedited photos or video from Horn Island on July 4th, or first-hand information about what happened there, both the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and the family's legal team have asked that you come forward with it directly, rather than posting it online first. Preserve the original file. Preserve its metadata. Do that before you post an interpretation of it anywhere, on any platform, to any following, no matter how small. A verified fact, an attributed allegation, and an open question are not the same thing, no matter how similar they can be made to look in a caption written to get clicks. Awareness can help find real evidence. Rumor can only bury